Hello, hello, hello. Thank you very much for being here. This is obviously, just in case you happens to be in the wrong room, this is going to be a presentation on the role of education in homelessness prevention. My name is Nathan Okonta, and I am a research assistant at the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. We have three fantastic presenters presenting on three really, really important topics. We are going to go by Jane presenting first, and after Jane, it will be Karen Nando. So we do have two Karens, right? So perhaps using their acronyms might be a good way to identify them. So we have a Karen B, who will be presenting last, and a Karen Nando, who will be presenting second. But before we do that, before we move on to the presentations, I'm going to do a very quick land acknowledgement so that we are very much conversant and always be aware that we happens to be on native land. I acknowledge that I am on traditional land, and I thank the people of First Nations for affording me the opportunity to be here, to be part of various communities, including this particular gathering, to be part of the dreams, aspirations in this land in a quest for a better tomorrow for all. This territory includes many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, the Windats, and it is currently home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. I want, just before we move on to the presentation very quickly, to remind us that we can make this practice something more concrete. Concrete in the sense that we begin either individually or both, individually and collectively, to ensure that we are not just acknowledging land, that we are doing more to improve relationships, and that we acknowledge the essential role that indigeneity has played in the Canadian history. Not just Canadian history, but in Canada's present, as well as its future. But achieving all that depends on all of us, individually and collectively, as I said before, doing our bit to ensure that that is what we do have going forward. Our first presenter today is Jane Melenfant. Jane goes by the pronouns they and she. Jane is from Kapuskasing, Ontario, but is currently living in Tiohtià:ke, which is another name for Montreal, or the indigenous name for Montreal, where they are McGill Third Century Fellow. Their work looks at the intersections of education and homelessness, with a particular focus on lived experience, leadership, and activism. So please join me in welcoming Jane to this.
Thank you so much. Sure. Oh, I'm not going to know what time it is, though, so you're going to have to...
then you can have this.
Okay. It's good to keep me on track time-wise. Hi, everyone. I'm Jane. Thank you for introducing me. So today I'm going to be talking, this is a particularly wordy title, Participatory Research for Developing Prevention Capacity Across Schools and the Homelessness Sector, Lessons from Youth for Pedagogy, Practice, and Policy Shifts. As Nathan mentioned, my name is Jane Malenfant, and I work in Tiohtià:ke, or so-called Montreal. I also wrote CAH 2023, which I'm pretty sure is not the year that we are in. So that's where my head is at today. And so I'll try to share some coherent thoughts, and looking forward to discussing this topic more. I'm going to start with a bit of positioning about how I come into this research and this work and this activism around schools, lived experience, and homelessness. I'm going to talk a bit about one particular project that actually some folks in the room have been involved with, and the methodologies that I use to do research for action and for change and for housing justice. And I'll be sharing some experiences that young people shared with me about their trajectories through schools. I'll be looking a bit at the policy landscape that we're working within in Quebec, and then thinking through recommendations and actions that I'm carrying through from the youth team that we worked with and other people with lived experience that I work with today. So thinking through the land that we were working on as well. So as Nathan mentioned, I'm from Kapuskasing, which is in Northern Ontario, but I've been working in Tiohtià:ke, Muniang and Anishinaabemowin, or so-called Montreal, for about 6 years now. But we spoke with young people who had different connections to land and territories outside of Montreal as well. And so people shared experiences traveling across different territories and having different relationship to land across Turtle Island, but also in other spaces like Aotearoa. And so I wanted to ground this within a state policy landscape within Quebec, but also thinking through different territories and lands that youth were navigating throughout their trajectories of experiences of homelessness. So I've said this like 3 times now, I'm from Kapuskasing. I always say that because some people know where that is, and then we can talk about Kapuskasing. I am a settler, and I'm a settler of French and Scottish ancestry on my mother's side and French and Cree ancestry on my father's side. I'm also someone with lived experience of homelessness, and youth homelessness in particular, and a lot of experiences with housing precarity after experiences of homelessness. I'm also someone with lived experience of educational disengagement. So I was kicked out of secondary school while I was homeless because of the symptoms of my homelessness. And so I began this research in those experiences of my own, but also learning from other young people about how their experiences look similar or different. I'm also a researcher. So I am a researcher right now in a postdoctoral fellowship at McGill, but I also work with other organizations doing community research. And I also kind of see myself as an educator now. I've taught formally within schools and universities, but I also really try to do community education, youth-led education, activist, anarchist education that serves the needs of learners where they're at. So, a member of this team is in the audience today. Hi, Naomi. So what I'm going to share today comes out of work with a team called Youth Action Research Revolution, or YAR, which was the team that the name that the youth researchers came up with. And so this is Cheyenne, Mickey, Laurence, and myself. Also part of the team is Dr. Naomi Nichols and Maxime Plamondon, who are not here with me, but I always kind of bring through with this work because we worked on it together. We also worked in partnership with Dans la Rue, which was amazing, and we're able to do a lot of our data collection and our research and our partnering with Dans la Rue, and they were able to offer services and supports that we could not have done as researchers alone at McGill. And so this was really important grounding for how I was able to do this project in collaboration with others as well. And so thinking through, I'm not going to spend too much time on methodology, but happy to chat about it with anyone after. This work was really informed by youth participatory action research. So again, research that isn't just research for research's sake, but is really aimed at action and social change. And what's really awesome about YPAR, I think, is that you can allow young people to come in as youth. You're not expecting them to show up and mimic or mirror adult ideas of professionalism, but they can come in and shape things in the ways that is important to them. And so we might have an idea of what a youth researcher looks like, but they are telling us what they actually need, and we're adapting to those needs. It's also informed by institutional ethnography. So I mentioned that I began this work in my own lived experiences. So both my experiences of homelessness as a teen, my experiences in schools, but also my experiences today and where I'm at today. But collectively, we talked with young people. We spoke with 38 youth in Montreal, ages 16 to 29. And their experiences also shaped how we were able to understand how institutions worked and how services worked and how the state really organized our lives and our experiences of homelessness. So being able to begin in our experiences and look at systems of power and then hold them to account, ideally. And then what I bring into all of my work is really an anarchist grounding, that the state is always violent, the state is inherently violent, and that it will continue to do harm unless we change those structures. And so really thinking through as a team how we could use direct action and mutual aid to help each other as we were doing the research, and not putting that on the back burner while we tried to get results or data to change things, but that we can change them today. This is also there's artwork throughout from some of the youth researchers, and they are amazing. So this is from Maxime Plamondon. So education and homelessness, I think, is something that people are talking about more and more. This wasn't something that was thought about in my high school when I was kicked out. Homelessness wasn't really something that was imagined to be taking place in high schools, even in like bad high schools like the one I went to. And so what I've noted in this project and in my work, not a lot has changed in the 15, 16 years since I first experienced homelessness. And in fact, sometimes it's gotten worse. And so this is a quote from Faria, which is a pseudonym for one of the young people that shared with us. And she said, "Just working and going to school and not having a place to stay. It's what frustrates me the most is the fucking vicious cycle that comes with all of it. Like, it's really hard to have support when you have no support." And so we know from research and we know from some of our experiences in working with young people that once you enter a cycle where you're experiencing housing precarity, the impacts from that can make it really difficult to continue education. And then once that cycle begins, it takes so much more labor to get out of it. And so when we think of prevention, we're really thinking of ensuring that people don't have to have those impacts from those cycles of harm. And so what we were finding a lot was that young people were sharing that the symptoms of homelessness and or mental health struggles were interpreted by educators and school staff and administrators as bad behaviors. It wasn't necessarily, oh, this person is acting this way, so this is a sign that I should be helping them, but rather this is a reason why this is a bad student. And so I had this label as well. And so this happens again and again for young people. We also found when we were trying to think collectively about change that there's really a significant disconnect between what schools imagine is happening and what youth are experiencing. And so even if there's a policy that says that you're supporting the wellness of all young people, what that actually looks like in the everyday lives of youth is actually completely disconnected often from what is imagined by those who are making educational policy. This was a tricky one, Naomi, and I think of it often. One of the things that the young people we worked with said again and again is discernement, judgment is so important. They were like, if a teacher could just use their judgment to know what's best for me, that would make all the difference. They shouldn't go by the policy. They shouldn't need to follow the rules. They should just talk to me in the moment and respond, which is true, and that can have so many great impacts for students. However, unclear processes that allow that individual judgment to happen often also lead to discrimination. And so if we're saying every teacher should just do what they think is best, that will often continue to perpetuate racism and discrimination and stigma of homelessness and poverty in schools. And so we can't necessarily just say everyone can use their judgment, because not everyone has the education or the experiences to know what is best for that young person without asking them. Again, thinking of homelessness prevention, we can't really address homelessness without addressing discrimination. And so young people shared significant experiences of discrimination based on race, sexuality, gender, mental health, and language before experiences of homelessness. So many young people said, well, by the time I was homeless, I was already not going to school. I was already hating school. We had one young person talk about how they employed essentially a harm reduction approach to school. I could only go so many days a week because that was all I could take in my own mental health, because it was such a horrible place for me. And so if this is the reality before people are experiencing homelessness, schools are not a safe place to think of interventions. A lot of young people also shared that they were seen as bad seeds. So not only were they bad students, but they were a danger to other students because of their bad behavior. So again, the symptoms of homelessness are often punished in schools. So that might look like not showing up, being late, not being able to participate in the way they're expected, their grades slipping. These are things we see in other research as well. Trust, though, and this is something that came up in a panel that I moderated earlier today, trust is lost. So young people learn not to trust teachers and not to trust staff throughout their individual lives, but this is also intergenerational. And so young people often also shared that their parents told them that schools weren't safe places. So one example of this we can think of within a Canadian settler colonial context is residential schools. So for Indigenous students, schools aren't safe places. And so that is known. And so that mistrust becomes confirmed when school staff confirm it through their actions. Again, discrimination is something we need to be addressing. And then the policies that do exist and the practices that do exist often rely on systems like the child welfare system or police. And those continue to fail young people as well. So if the only response to a young person disclosing that they might be experiencing homelessness, sorry, I lost my water bottle, is calling a social worker or calling a police if they're in mental health crisis, that's another confirmation that they're not going to reach out in the future. And so if we create these systems where reaching out leads to you being torn away from your family, or leads to violence from police, then that's not going to be something you do in the future. So policy-wise, it's a bit tricky to think through what educational policy can do to think of education. And we can look at the situation in Ontario and the strike and the real need for capacity and solidarity with labor and teachers and school staff to think through how schools can't even begin to imagine homelessness as their problem to solve. So in Quebec, there's some cool things that we might be able to draw on. And also today I was supposed to be presenting with Charlotte Smith, who is amazing. If you ever get a chance to check out her work on schools and homelessness, I encourage you to do so. She did a policy scan of Canada, provincial, territorial policies in education a couple of years ago. There's no real policies that exist within these spaces to think about homelessness, and that's a problem. However, when we look at the educational policies in Quebec, we see, oh, you're amazing. I'm going to drink this all in like 5 minutes. Thank you so much. Oh, I still get really nervous when I present. Okay, so Quebec's Educational Act, schools are responsible for some of these translations are my own, so they might be a bit funky, harmonious integration of youth with physical, intellectual, and learning disabilities. So this is really cool in that it provides a grounding to understand schools' responsibilities towards young people. When we spoke with young people, so many of them shared that they had a lot of trouble getting learning disability diagnoses, mental health diagnoses, and accommodations because they didn't have the right words or the right diagnosis or the right way to communicate that they needed additional supports. And so when we think of this in terms of a broader definition of what youth need in terms of accommodation, this could be a really powerful way to be thinking of schools' responsibilities. In 2017, Quebec also came out with a policy on educational success, where they say that the school system is expected to promote equal opportunity and social equity, counter exclusion and various forms of violence, and help fight poverty. So that's pretty clear in terms of a responsibility. We know that young people who are experiencing poverty are more likely to also experience homelessness, and so this is a place where we can think through the school responsibility towards equity and countering exclusion. And so we can think of that broadly again in how young people were describing their experiences in schools. There's also some cool homelessness policies that exist in Quebec that speak to schools and the importance of education and access to training. So in Quebec's national policy on homelessness, working together to avoid the streets, is that a decent translation of that? All right, cool. Mentions dropping out of school as a key individual risk factor that can lead to homelessness and social isolation. So there's the acknowledgement within these policies that this is something we need to be paying attention to. However, as I mentioned, there's a real disconnect between policy and the experiences of youth. And so how can we be bridging between policy and practice and grounding that in the experiences of youth most impacted by homelessness? And by that, I mean young people who are experiencing homelessness, but also young people who are more likely to experience homelessness from an equity perspective. So we can think of 2S LGBTQ plus youth, we can think of newcomer youth, we can think of Indigenous youth, youth of color, youth with mental health issues, and youth from poverty, and how are their experiences shaping our responses within policy, but also practice. And these come from our youth team as well, and these were things that we worked together on. We must understand homelessness and disengagement in the context of broader structural and systemic discrimination. So we can't pop homelessness out as an issue and say we're going to work on this without working on these other issues that really impact the trust and the experiences of young people in schools before, during, after experiences of homelessness. And policy, again, doesn't speak to the long-standing and warranted mistrust of institutional responses in many communities. So for a lot of people, staying safe and taking care of their communities means not engaging with the state as much as possible because the state is harmful. And so how do we speak to responses that take that into account and validate that as real and true? One thing that came up again and again is something I'm thinking about a lot is lived experience or youth-led curricula, tools and training and education. And so how can teachers, school staff, administrators, people working with young people have curricula given to them to support them working with youth that is led by youth and is led by lived experience and is really grounded in what's actually happening for students and other young people? So another aspect that I look at is also in the absence of schools being able to immediately respond to the needs of youth, how can we support youth in the efforts that they're already doing to take care of one another and learn how to navigate things and survive on a daily basis? And so youth are already working to learn together and survive because they have to, because of the failure of the state and institutions that they rely on. Not always failure, but there's some key places where schools are failing young people. So youth are already filling gaps in education and social supports, in peer groups and community because they must, because they have no choice to, and that peer support becomes really important. So many young people we talked about schooling with said, well, I depended on my friends because I had no one else to depend on. And what becomes tricky with this is also that sometimes the education that youth are doing with one another is not grounded in, the best knowledge. Maybe it's great knowledge, but it's not maybe understanding how systems work so they could get the accommodations that they need. And so they're taking care of each other against the state rather than accessing services that might be provided but aren't accessible to them anyway because they don't know about them. Oh no, okay. So this work is also necessarily political. I used to talk a little bit, but since I've been in academia, I talk a lot more. Is necessarily political and rejects the inevitability of racist, colonial, heteronormative, and ableist institutions. So I think it's really cool to look at the work that youth are doing to reject the inevitability that schools must always look like this. Schools can look different. They should look different. And I think we're really grounded in this idea that schools have to look a certain way, but youth can show us how this work can be done differently. And I think really important and hopefully something we can all take into our work in ongoing ways is that we don't have the answer today, but we can find that answer and build new ways of working together through experimentation. And so this is something that we did a lot on our team. We didn't always know how to make it work well, but we learned from each other how to do things in the least harmful way possible to try to imagine new ways of learning and being together. I'm just gonna end on this. Okay. So finally, I will talk about this with anyone at any point today and tomorrow. From points of possibility and points of failure, which was how we were analyzing our data with the young people, what are the points of possibility and what are the points of failure that they're currently experiencing? They were really thinking of action. And so the first is that we have to ground our efforts to address youth homelessness in learning from the experiences of youth, absolutely, hands down. Based on those experiences, we must create robust training for teachers, staff, and students in schools on the realities of youth homelessness to both combat stigma about homelessness, but also increase potential for early intervention and homelessness prevention. And then finally, we have to think differently about how to pursue educational efforts and youth-led mutual aid, that work that's already happening in youth groups, in order to radically imagine a different future through education. Thank you so much.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation, Jane. I think we have about, 5 minutes to. Oh, yeah, you want me to answer questions? Please, if you don't mind, if it's not terribly too demanding of your time.
I think I could do it.
Massive. All right. So, do you want to go?
So Naomi asked, said that I'm uniquely positioned as someone who teaches teachers or pre-service teachers who might be going into the classroom to mobilize this research. And absolutely, so even before this research started. I was going in and talking to pre-service teachers about my own experiences, and now I can add to that with so many experiences from other young people. But the number one thing I hear when I talk to pre-service teachers is, I never thought of this. I never ever thought that this was something I would have to be addressing in my work. And what I also hear from youth and teachers is that this exists across different schools. So it's not just in bad schools or poor schools, it's across experiences. Anyone can experience homelessness. And so I think that it's really powerful to see that sometimes for the first time, I'm talking about homelessness and they're thinking about how to integrate that into their practice or even notice it. So I think it's something that does not get talked about in pre-service teaching programs. Yeah. Cynthia. Yeah, that teachers get a lot of PD training, but this isn't on the table. Yeah, so when I work with teachers, I also find like it's not teachers' fault. So I work with so many people who are like, I want to get training on this, or I want to get training on anti-oppression, or the issues facing trans and non-binary youth in my classes, but that's not what's being offered. And if it is, people don't have the capacity to actually show up and learn. So I think that's another thing. So I've been working on it, but it's difficult because who's going to take it on? You have to work with specific schools, school boards. But I think we could do it, and I'm actually in the spring doing a training with a bunch of teachers. However, do they have the capacity to show up and learn? I don't know. They're really tired and they're overworked and they're over capacity. So I think we have to create conditions for them to also be able to learn and bring that into their practice. But I think, yeah, it's such a good question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and I would say to that too, like, because it's so tricky across provinces and territories, but if it started happening somewhere, I think it could be an example to draw from other places. And I was going to say something. Uh-oh, it's gone. Yeah, for sure. But I think that it can't only be that too, because, yeah, it has to be from everywhere. Thank you.
Super, super. Thank you so much. So moving on, our next presenter is Karen Naido. Karen goes by the pronouns she, her. Karen is a postdoctoral fellow with the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. So she's my colleague. She specializes in content development and knowledge mobilization. So this is really a very good topic for you, isn't it? Right? At Making the Shift, her research interest includes understanding how young Canadians of Caribbean descent, deals with mental health. So please join me in welcoming Karen. No. Right. Yeah, he'll get it. So come join us. Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Nathan, for that introduction. I'm the big purple one. Good afternoon. So as you notice, my name is not Melissa Perry, but Melissa Perry is one of our, sorry, right here, the mic. My acting skills weren't perfected in high school. Totally understand. Melissa Perry is our graduate senior researcher on the team. She's the one who prepared this presentation, was very excited to present this work, and had a family emergency at the last minute and had to drop. So we didn't want the presentation to go flat, so I am presenting on behalf of Melissa Perry and team. So forgive me if I fumble a little bit. I learned the slides at a very last minute. So I'm clicking, right? Okay, thank you. So today we're looking at 4 different areas. We're going to talk about the background to Upstream Canada. What does it mean? Methods, what kind of methods are involved, and what kind of methods have we collected this kind of research? Preliminary results, and then the implementations for future work. Okay? So what is upstream? Sorry, I'm going to navigate a little bit here. So upstream is the role of preventing youth. So I know Jane talked about the school system and some of the flaws of the school system, whereas my presentation is talking all about the school system and getting the school system involved. How do we get the school system at what is a different level, instead of getting right at 16 when you start to see the issues, start getting involved by 12. So the elementary level, what does that mean? So if kids are starting to miss school, if they're having a little bit of an emotional struggle, what does that look like? So catching students right at the level of grade 7 and 8 and working with them from there. So we have in our findings are really in the infant stages, and it's through interview process. So we've had this implementation done over the last year, and so this is just kind of highlights of what are some of the things that we've noticed from this research. And then outline some of the next steps that Upstream has in Canada. So why start at school? Well, based on research, the homeless population in Canada, 20% is consisted of youth. And that's a significant number of the entire population. For youth who experience homelessness, as my colleague Jane has pointed out, most drop out of school. And it's a whopping 53%, over 53%. That's a lot, that's almost 50% of the 20% who experience it. And 40% of this population experience some signs of homelessness before the age of 16. So that's also significant to recognize. And once you've been touched by the system at one point or the other, chronic homelessness is soon to follow. So that's really important to note. Oh, sorry. Navigating too many things. So here are my 53% bubbles. So addressing youth homelessness is a multidimensional problem. It is not just targeting the youth system or the social system or the health system. All of these systems need to come together to understand what is really some of the issues that young people are experiencing, and not just young people, but their families. What's provoking some of the issues that we end up seeing that becomes more chronic in the end? There's a lack of awareness, as most of us who are sitting in this room understand and have brought it up in some of the Q&As just now, that the lack of awareness is one of the key pieces, in my personal opinion. I think that education around homelessness and homeless framework should be addressed at all levels. So right at the BA, med school, law school, everywhere. You should be learning about what is really some of the issues and how do we, because they all intersect with health, somebody experiencing, me? Oh, okay, sorry. Somebody experiencing some signs of homelessness, eventually their health breaks down, social networks break down. Those are really important things to pay attention to. Upstream is more of an intervention process. So it's preventative focused. So how do we catch students right at the beginning stages before they're even thinking of leaving home? How do you increase accessibility? And part of that is information. What kind of systems are available? What kind of resources are available to youth and their families? It's trauma informed and it's cross sectional. So it's more than one area of folks sitting at the same table having different conversations. And it's equity and anti oppressive based. So what is upstream altogether? So Upstream Canada falls into the early intervention parts. As I've said before, it starts right at the root cause. What are some of the troubles that are starting? It was, and then it's hopefully, it catches or acts as a preventative method to hopefully catch youth before they're leaving home, leaving care, or ending up in much more serious issues. Schools are an ideal place for this intervention, and one of the reasons why they're an ideal place is because most students have to be in school before age of 16. So they are there every single day, interacting, whether they're there every day by choice or they're there most of the point of time. Upstream Canada was adopted by Australia's Gleaning Project. And in the first 3 years of post-implementation in Australia, they found that youth homelessness was reduced by 40%. It was brought here by Stephen Gates' COH team, brought it and kind of rolled it out in Canada. So it's currently operating in 2 areas of Canada, Kelowna, BC, and St. John's, Newfoundland. How does it work? So students complete a need assessment in grade 7. So in Kelowna, for instance, this is delivered, it's in 4 different elementary schools. Currently, the aim is for 8, but it has caught quite a bit of traction, especially with government. So currently it's in 4 different schools. Students fill it out around grade 7. So for our last implementation, Kelowna's already had 4, and the last one was in October. So it's right at the start of the school year, trying to figure out what's going on. There's about 50 to 54 questions. It's all on survey base. It's online. Students' information is not disclosed. And it's the so the research team, so Melissa Perry, who's a part of that research team, collects the data and then tiers who's in real serious issues and danger, who's in semi kind of struggling, but just coasting, and who is okay. So that's kind of the results that are coming in. In our last implementation in Kelowna, we had about 261 students who accessed this, the survey, right? And so based on the results, students are flagged and they're seen by an implementer who's housed in school. So teachers are not involved in any way. It's removed from the teachers because the questions that were raised are really important to address. Well, teachers are overworked. They have so many things to think about. And for so many teachers, they don't want to get involved. Like, you don't want to personalize the problem, right? So it becomes a non-personal issue. So students who are flagged in the first and second tier of somewhat danger and really pretty serious, they're called out of class discreetly, because everybody gets an interview process, whether you were tested at a non-risk area or not. So it's inclusive, where it's not identified as, oh my God, it's that kid who's in trouble. Everybody comes in and does an interview. Because some of the the reason why the interview is done is for students who didn't mark as in serious danger, ends up somewhere along the line as one of the students who needs the support the most. And students who may come in as high risk are ones who maybe had a bad day and don't need resources at all. So it's really important to kind of double check on this. And what's really neat about the implementation process is that students who turn down resources and say, no, I'm not really interested in this, 6 months later, they might remember, you know what, I kind of wanted to learn a little bit more, and they'll see that implementer back and kind of do a touch point interview again to say, how do I access these resources? So this is why there's a twofold process. In St. John's on the other hand, so I spoke about Kelowna and St. John's. There have been 2 implementation processes that's already happened. And part of that is interference of school closures due to COVID. And another part of that is that in St. John's, the province of St. John's, they have an opt-in, opt-out process. So that is also considered part of hindering in having all students do the needs assessment the way they done in Kelowna. So it's only parents who agree to have their students assessed, and so the numbers become a lot smaller. And I'll talk about some of the reasons for that in a millisecond. So the interviews that I'm presenting today, we've only done with 10 implementers. Remember, it's been about a year. 5 students across who have benefited from the program and were willing to come forward to say what some of their experiences were. And we themed the interviews. And again, this process is a more of a bottom-up approach as opposed to top-down. So it's really useful to kind of know that. So the benefits to it, it's collaborative, it's person-focused, it's interdisciplinary. Some of the challenges is the definition of homelessness itself. So students and their families don't want to identify as what homelessness means. So the language around that, having trouble at home, having trouble period, being deemed as a troubled person, you're not engaged. Those are the kind of the conversations that were happening. So part of the literature that was going out into the community was having to revise what does homelessness mean, right? Maybe we're just supporting students, right? Emotional support. And this language has still kind of been thrown back and forth of what does homelessness means, and it's something that we should be looking at a collective level. And then integrating families into upstream process and various systems. So we have a ton of stories that I can't address all in this very short presentation of some of the success stories, but if any of you are interested, I'd be happy to share more information. But I do want to say one thing before I move off of this slide. One of the really neat things about upstream, particularly in Kelowna, where it's gained so much traction, is that the city of Kelowna has adopted, they have a 5-step safety process, and upstream is integrated as one of the ways in creating a safer city. So if we address youth and some of the needs that they're having at a really early stage, then we can address how they interact with other systems, whether it's a juvenile system, whether it's being on the streets, whatever it is that they end up needing support for. So Kelowna, the city of Kelowna has really seen it as something significant to work through. Here are some of the interviews that we've gotten based on the benefits. So one student said that they really enjoyed working with an upstream implementer. And everything that student had said, they felt like they were being heard. And being heard is really important, especially when you feel that nobody will understand what it is that you're going through. I was able to be really vulnerable and let out some of the emotions and feelings that I really hadn't told anyone. I knew that I was going to be all confident. I wasn't going to be scared or anything. I was always open and honest. Some of the interviews that we had from the implementer, one of the implementers said it was really nice to know that there was some sort of support out there, especially when working with teachers, where the teachers felt like this process was removed off their agendas, like somebody else had more of equipped skills in dealing with some of the issues. You have no idea as how many times we wear a counselor hat is from the implementer. It is really nice to know that we have trained people supporting us. The school system does not provide us with some counseling support rate, but it's not enough. Does support, sorry. It's absolutely not enough. So what has changed since after the pilot and since Upstream started working with students is that you know that there's a framework. We can work closely in supporting these kids. Some of the challenges, one of the implementers voiced that we've realized that, yes, this is a one-time assessment in an everyday reality. It's like, we talk about the assessment, learning. Those aren't good judges of the situation. When we assess the learning, we assess overall time period, its observations, its connections, and its assignments. We're trying to look at the social emotional situations that people need to identify. How do you answer differently in the mindset of what we're looking at, and how will that affect the responses? So this is really really important because, as I said before, sometimes a kid is having a rough day and they may answer a question like how many times you haven't slept at home, how many times you've slept at somebody else's couch, how did you feel this morning when you woke up? So the emotional process influences how they answer the SNA, and that's why the interview process is so significant. 2 minutes? Okay. I'm not doing too bad. Here's another challenge. All organizations have had issues with recruitment and haven't had enough people. There's huge workloads, and sometimes you run into issues where we aren't people, there's not enough support in this area. So that's definitely a challenge, is being able to recognize that this is something very significant. Some recommendations that implementers suggested. We really want to make changes to best support young people, and we're working with and really need to kind of dive into family and work support as a whole unit. So not just looking at the student who's experiencing the problem, but working with their families to say, how do we support better? And then finally, now that we have the opportunity to look at what does it mean to build resilience, I just finished my annual report. I was quite shocked when I put all the services into percentage at the bottom, and things like employment support, income assistance, housing support, what that looks like. So it's not enough. And that's how Upstream works. It's a collective system, and we're looking holistically at everything. If you have further questions or comments, here are my email and Melissa Perry, who I'm stepping in for. Thank you very much.
So we have about 7 minutes for question for Karen, so don't go anywhere.
I think that's a really great question. Currently, Upstream only allows for a year, so while they're in elementary school. However, in Kelowna, for instance, there is a partner relationship with some of the high schools that students are going to. But again, this breaches privacy for outing that student in high school. The resources are still available for students, so they can come back to, and hoping that there's a better system in terms of bridging, especially in Kelowna where it's becoming citywide attention. Hopefully that gap will be bridged more smoothly, where a student feels that they're not just left a system of support into a big, wider place, that they don't have any supports. In St. John's, it's a smaller community, so they're still working out a little bit more of the kinks. But for now, it's just a year. You're welcome. Yeah. Sure. That's really important. So the first question for those who are online, the first question was, what was the length of time that you followed the students for, and how much time they have, and that was a year. The second question is asking, how do you build trust with youth so they can devolve into their own personal lives? And I mean, you're asking somebody to tell you a lot of their own story without, feeling threatened that some other agency is going to get involved. And part of that is when they're answering the multiple choice questions and come back into that initial interview stage to say, it's not disclosing what you tested as, but can you tell me some of the things you were feeling when you answered this? And did you know such resources are available to you? And did you have a conversation about this? How does that make you feel? So it's more allowing that student to open up and, even if they sit there and say nothing. So we have one story where a single mom, two sisters were struggling, and one sister totally opened up and felt really safe, and then 10 minutes later decided no, it's not for them, and told her older sister. Her older sister came, found those resources, and was like, wow, this is amazing. Became the ambassador, worked with mom, and kind of making things sort of more stable. The younger sister, even though disconnected and was initially the one who did the survey, said, I'm not ready. And that was totally okay. But there was trust and enough information, and I think that's part of it, is the education process. There's not enough education to say what kind of resources are available, because that's still, the younger sister has that information. She's armed with the information, and when ready, hopefully will come forward. I think for the implementers, they're social work trained. So a lot of times, like, some of the questions that they are asking are they're looking for signs of how much is the student really trying to disclose, and and how much are you willing to, and part of that goes back to the education. How much information? It's not really finding out what kind of trouble you're in, but here's some information in case you're in trouble. And once that student kind of walks away with that information, they can come back and say, well, I think I'm feeling this. Is this something I should be paying attention to? That's somewhat helpful. Thank you. Hi.
Hi. I just wanted some clarity when you're presenting. You said that when you went to Kelowna, did you have parental permission, and then when you went to St. John's, that was a barrier?
So in Kelowna, parental permission wasn't needed. So it's what's something called opt-in, opt-out. So the ethical process came through York University. So we weren't the ones who physically did the assessment. It was rolled out online, and then our team received it. So we had a third party kind of tally those numbers, and then we analyzed the numbers for before disclosing back to you. So because of the way the system is set up in Kelowna, the school board allows that you can kind of ask questions, ask kids to engage in something that is school-based, right? And so it's not tricking parents, it's just part of that process. Whereas in St. John's, you needed to have permission from everything that you roll out, whether it's a permission slip. And part of why Kelowna, it worked in terms of the school board, is because they found that when they sent home information, parents either didn't read it, kids didn't take it out of their backpack, the information got lost. So a lot of times parents didn't even know it was something that was going on, even though the information went home. So information is provided, you just don't need a signature on it, whereas St. John's you do.
So I guess my follow-up question is then, how, if we're culturally, I'm looking at it in a cultural aspect, that these tests are great and it's a great way to get out the information, but if parents don't know, and then we need them to take the supports to also help their students and their kids, then there's some mistrust on, did you find that happened, any mistrust?
I understand what you're asking. So the question is asking culturally, how are you getting folks to buy into something that seems so personal and discreet? And part of that is that the information is in the community. So the information is being delivered in the community. So whether it's a pizza party, whether it's a bowling night, so it's like a school event that kind of rolls this information out so parents are aware. So even if they didn't see the paper work, they do know, they have some sense that this is happening.
Thank
That's
you
it.
so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that. That is wonderful. Our next presenter is Karen Bosworth. Karen goes by the pronouns she and her. Karen is a senior instructional designer, a very fancy name, for a very fancy work, for the Homelessness Learning Hub, where she develops training, online trainings, where she develops training and curates learning resources for the housing and homelessness sector. Karen specializes, and this is really important, in developing online training that is learner-centered and practical. So she is the ideal person to present after this two wonderful presentations, because she's now going to tell us how exactly to achieve this educational goal. Thank you so much, Karen. You're welcome.
Okay, hi. My actual title of my presentation is about building capacity for homelessness prevention using the HLH Hub, which is our nickname for the Homelessness Learning Hub. And I'm really excited to talk to you about this today because I have a feeling that not too many people, or not as many people as I would like, know about the Homelessness Learning Hub. So can I just see a show of hands? Have you heard of the Homelessness Learning Hub, or have you visited? Actually, that's amazing. It's like about half the room, so fantastic. So, I was going to say next. I'm the next. So the Homelessness Learning Hub is a learning platform, a place for training, a place for professional development for the sector, purpose-built for you guys. It's free. You're going to hear me say that a lot. It's free, and it provides self-paced online learning. So practical tools, free, accessible, user-friendly, both in English and French. So, okay, online training. I know. We've all had kind of like hit and miss experiences with online training, e-learning. It can be, let's face it, sometimes it's not the best, right? And I'm not saying, you can judge for yourself what this is like. But when it's done right, it has a ton of advantages. People have more flexibility and control over their learning, how they learn, how much time they spend on lessons, what they need to spend more time on, what they feel they can spend less time on. The lessons are short and to the point, and they're most importantly, hopefully, super relevant to what you're doing in your work. And we use things like YouTube videos and recorded, found media, as well as some that we create ourselves that can be rewatched, rewound. There's transcripts. You can spend as much or as little time on it as you need to. So online training, what I'm trying to say, it's good for people who have, who aren't going to be at their desk at noon on a Tuesday for a webinar. If you're not an office worker, you're not able to do this, or you don't have that, time on a Saturday afternoon because you've got kids and a life, and you can't do the course that's at a certain time. So this is free. It's on demand. It's available when you are. Let's go past. So I am here. So I'm glad to hear that there's a lot of awareness out there already about the site. We've been around for a while. We have over 500 English resources, 250 French resources. We have things called collections of resources as well, and we have many of those 44 and 39 in French, 44 English. We have 19 soon to be, I'm still working on them, English trainings, and many have also been translated into French. I think there's 14 or 15 that we've been able to translate so far. So since 2020, which is when we redesigned the site, 6,500 plus people have enrolled in training, which is amazing, but not nearly enough. We want more. And half of those have actually completed a training, and in addition to being free, they've received their certificate of completion, which is also, I think, important. So in doing this work, and I'm just part of a team in doing this work, but in doing this work, I've been looking a lot at we talk about building capacity, and what does that mean to build capacity? And there's a lot of talk about that, but what is the research actually saying about how do we do this? What do we need to do to build capacity in the homelessness sector workforce itself, right? So training is a big part of this. Because, as you know, you're not going to be surprised to hear, these are some of the three big studies that I'm aware of. Direct service workers are frequently undertrained, underpaid, and overworked. A study by our own team at COH found that there's high rates of burnout and turnover in the sector, and that providing on-the-job training is an additional burden for service organizers, right, for service providers and agencies. It's expensive, it's time consuming. And you have staff turnover, you have to keep doing it over and over again. So training alongside, better working conditions and improved pay are three really important factors of how we're going to build capacity in the sector. I'm sure you would agree with all of that. And so this is one little piece of how we might do that. Because an essential component of serving the populations of clients that you serve is that we have a knowledgeable, skilled, and committed workforce that can stay engaged with clients over long periods of time. So we did a survey when we relaunched the site, and we wanted to know what people were looking for in terms of what their challenges were and what their needs were. So people told us that they get training from in-house training workshops, they attend webinars, they attend conferences like this, and some are lucky to have communities of practice and team meetings and supervision. Then we have a pandemic, right? And all the training either disappears or goes online. And that's great, because a lot of people said that made it possible for me to access training that wasn't possible before. Some people said that. A good number of people said that. But then there was also, on the flip side, a lot of people who said, we just don't have the technology available to us. We don't have laptops. We have desktop computers. They don't have sound or video or whatever. We can't participate in online training. A lot of online training, I'm thinking of some of the suicide prevention, that just wasn't available in a virtual format, right? So this kind of training just had to be put on hold, or it was pieced together with in-house staff. So there was some positive improvement of access to training, but let's face it, sometimes the quality of the training, we're talking about in-person training that was just like quickly flipped to be put online without a lot of thought to what does an online training need to look like for this topic. So that's what we're about. We purposely design training that's meant for e-learning. So it's not your in-person training that's just like, don't just take your slide deck and convert it to, slides on anyway. So I digress. So let me go next. We need the reason, we know that this work requires specialized knowledge. We know that you need to understand the experiences, people with lived experience. We need to know that, what the policy legislation is. We need to understand all of the frameworks and models and the service delivery. But what's happening a lot of the time is that, this is another thing we heard, is that people having to rely on getting their training elsewhere. For example, somebody said we rely on community partners like community health and mental health to include us when they can, right? Or, training is coming from outside the sector, and we're trying to like patch together and make it work for us. So, maybe other sectors have a little bit more money for training. So we see this as not acceptable. We need purpose-built training for the sector. We don't need to make a patchwork of things that people are finding elsewhere. I'll just say it also. Let me just go back. I didn't click. We're finding that other people from other sectors are taking our training, so that's kind of interesting. As well as specialized knowledge, the work requires specialized skill sets. This is incredibly, as you know, I'm speaking to you guys, you're the ones doing the work. I'm sitting here. But the work is physically and emotionally demanding. Frontline workers provide specialist skills in complex work environments. Service providers must be highly skilled and well-trained. So there's a huge demand. I know that a lot of training is happening in our organizations on the ground for frontline work, but a lot of that is the CPR and the first aid, right? It's all that mandatory compliance training that has to happen, the onboarding of new staff. And that's super important, but when is the time for the other training going to happen, right? So this one-time training that we're lucky to get because some organization invited 3 of our team members to go and attend, that's great, but it's not enough because that's not going to change. That's not going to be enough support to change how I do my work, right? If that's me. So again, just a quote from one of the research studies: the combined challenges of the inherently difficult nature of their work, the need to work independently, and the lack of professional training can create a stressful work environment and potentially diminish the quality of care. So we know that training is important. This is what we have on the site. We have, as I said, we have resources. We create some, we beg, borrow, and steal some, we curate them essentially. But we're looking for things that are practical, that are engaging, that are research informed, that are going to, that are job specific, just so that you can make sense of it right away. No translation needed, right? I should say one of our partners is Reaching Home, so we're also a repository for a lot of their training materials. So that's where you go if you need a lot of that. If you're looking for that stuff, that's where you're going to find it. This is some list of some of the popular and top trainings that we have there. And we have, as I said, soon to be 19 trainings available right now and more to come. One of the really popular ones that we've had, to my surprise, was, I shouldn't say that, but the harm reduction course. Of course, it's a popular topic. I've been pleasantly surprised by the response. It's been really successful. We have a new one that we just rolled out on Monday, and already a few people have taken it. So it's on self-care. So check that one out. And again, we translate them into French, so those are coming as well. I know that there is tremendous creativity and adaptability and resourcefulness in the sector, and I know that if there's something you need and you can't find it, you build it, you make it, you make do. So we're not surprised to hear that organizations take our training and do what they need with it, which is fantastic. So what I'm trying to say is online training isn't going to be everybody's jam. I get it. It may not be, it's fantastic and I think it's important, but it's also not going to be all things to everybody, right? But the resource is there. Take it, use it. Have a team take a training together and then get together once a week and talk about it. This is what we hear people are doing. Use it to onboard new staff. Use it to onboard your board of directors or your admin staff, right? There's a lot of 101 foundational training about homelessness on there. It's a lot of, So think about what's going to work for you. There's all kinds of different ways that you can take a 3-hour online training and turn it into something else in your organization. Let me know if you're doing that too, because I'd love to, I want to know how people are using this. We've also heard quite a lot, speaking of students, but like college students are being assigned our trainings. So this is good. This is good if college students in mental health and addictions programs are learning about homelessness, right? So there's, but anyway, whatever. I was going to say, that's great, but it's for you guys. It's you guys are the ones that I'm building this for, that we are building, that our team is working for. So my last point is, well, not quite the last, but this is a growing resource. We're just, we're getting started. We're 3 years into since our relaunch, and we need to have the idea. We need to keep the ideas coming, right? So we want to continue to reflect the needs of the sector, and that means we need to continue to engage with folks like you to find out, what are your needs, what kind of training, not just the topics, but like what are the skills that you need help with. I know there's so many things you already know how to do. Where can we be, better suited to fill in the gaps? We of course love to hear if you know about fantastic resources. We can put them up there. We need to know what you need and what kind of online training we need to be developing. We can work with you, for example, to help convert training to online. If there's something you feel like you could share, more widely in the sector, that's something we can do. We also have our partner hub solutions that we've done this before with agencies to help create training that they use for their, to share their own research or knowledge as well. So that's something you can do. If I'm glad to hear, for those of you in the room that didn't put up your hand earlier, please check us out. If you have people in your organization that do deliver training or do program development, and you think they would be interested in knowing more about this, I'd love for you to put them in touch with me. Or my manager, and our contact information is on the next slide. But in the meantime, check us out. You can visit us on Twitter. I'm looking at Emma, our comms. Sign up to receive our monthly newsletter, so you'll be the first to know when new resources are available. You can do that on our site. And you can email me. I'm Karen. I'm Senior Instructional Designer, and Steph Vasco is our Communications Director, but also you can talk to her about Hub Solutions, which is our partner to create training. And I think that's all I have to say, but I really appreciate your attention today, and sorry I'm a little bit scattered, but thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Karen, for that. Just because you left a few minutes on the table, we are going to add that to your question time. So we have about 9 minutes for Karen to take on or to take any questions that you guys might have. Thank you.
I have a question.
Hi, Jane.
Oh, go ahead.
Hi, Karen. My question, I guess I can. Hello. The Homeless Hub used to have curriculum for teachers to use in their classes, and is that something that is going to be brought back or developed further or updated? Because that was awesome.
We would love to have. The question is, we used to have curriculum for teachers. Yes, that I think that still is somewhere buried on the Homeless Hub site. That would be something that we would want to update, and we would love to have a research or academic partner to help us do that. So things like that. I mean, we can't create these things on our own, but we would love to make those kind of connections. So thank you. Yes, I think that's things like that are very important. 100%. Yeah. Question. We are absolutely open to those kinds of discussions. So right now, I create the training on my own alongside our French translator, and our comms team is our support. But as I said, through Hub Solutions and also in some other situations too, we've partnered with community to create. This is what we want to see eventually doing more of. So yes, I'm open to having that conversation right now with you if you're interested. I thought there might have been a hand over here. And I'm happy to give up my time if people have questions for the other two presenters too. I don't know if you just all want to go see if there's dessert out there in the hall, right? Emma?
Not really a question, but a comment. If you do want to sign up for our newsletter today, at our table we do have the link. So if you come and visit our table, we can help you sign up right away.
Thanks.
Also, if you want to send us resources to add to like some of our collections that are in exist, I'm happy to add that to the Learning Hub as well. So
Yeah, so if you go to the homelessnesslearninghub.ca, there's a link to sign up for the monthly newsletter. You can go to our table downstairs, or you can go on Twitter and follow us. We're at HLHUB_, so you can find us there. Yeah, and we're on LinkedIn as well and Instagram. Well, Homeless Hub is on Instagram. So that's it for me. Thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us and for being a wonderful, wonderful audience. So please do enjoy the rest of your day and engage in all the fun activities, right? So see you soon.